So, congratulations on completing the HTML and the CSS parts of this course. Now, in the first two chapters, we've been mostly concerned with the layout and the style of an HTML website. But with JavaScript, we start being able to actually make the website interactive, so allow the computer to respond to users' clicks and other types of input. This is where coding itself really begins, so it's quite exciting. Let's dive straight in. I'm going to create a new folder within my websites and call it Chapter 3 JavaScript. There we go, and then I'm going to go back into the CSS folder and just load up the index file we had there and copy the contents. And then I'm going to switch over to my text editor and create a new text document with that content. There we go. And this is going to be our standard file for this chapter. Right, so I'm going to change Learning CSS in the title to Learning JavaScript. There we go, get rid of these styles. And the way we're going to do some JavaScript in this video is not the way I would recommend doing it, generally speaking. It's the way that JavaScript was implemented in the very early years of the web, but there are much better ways and more efficient ways to do it now. But it's a good starting point. So let's see how it works. I'm going to put in a button element into my HTML document, and I'll put the text, click me, on that button. Then I'll save it in the desktop. Whoops. Once again, we'll call it index.html. Okay, now let's load that up. See what my button looks like. There it is. Okay, if I click it, nothing happens. So we're going to use a simple command called onClick. So onClick just means that the browser will respond when the user clicks the button. And I'm going to give you a very basic JavaScript command. Alert. There we go. So just to talk through what I've done there, so we've got onClick equals, and then in double quotes we've got the JavaScript within that, and then the JavaScript instruction that we're using is an alert, which just displays an alert box, and it's going to display it with the word hi in there. So let's see if that works. Refreshing that, click that, fantastic. So there's our JavaScript alert. You've probably seen one of those browsing the web at some point. So that's our starting point. I suggest you play around with that and try different words, different phrases in the alert box. And in the next video, we'll look at a much better way of doing that, which allows us to do things in a much more flexible and powerful way. So just like with the inline CSS that we saw in Chapter 2, the inline JavaScript makes it very difficult to write complex and detailed web programs. It's much better to separate out the JavaScript, if we can, from the actual content of the page itself. So let's see how we might do this. What we do is we introduce a script tag. Now the script tag actually works all by itself, like that, but it's good convention to give a type to the script tag, and what we'll do is give it a type of text/JavaScript. So this just makes it very clear to the browser that we're doing some JavaScript inside these script tags. And now we can write any JavaScript code that we like inside these script tags, and it will take place. It will be done by the browser. So let's have a similar command to what we just had. So we'll use the alert command again, and we'll say page loaded. Now, because this script tag isn't linked to a particular button, this will just happen as soon as the page itself is loaded. So let's see that in action. There we go. So as soon as I load the page, this JavaScript alert pops up. Now we can pop the script tag wherever we like, but again it's convention, and for various reasons it's a good idea to either put the script right at the end of the web page, so just before the close of the body, or in the head. So the head is a perfectly good place to put script tags as well. Now there's a few subtleties that we'll see as we go along, but mostly we'll be working with JavaScript internally in the bottom part of the page, so just before the body tag. So if our JavaScript is going to be separated out from the bulk of the actual content of the page, we need a way to connect the JavaScript with the particular elements and the parts of the page itself. So let's find out how we do that. I'm going to get rid of my button and put in a p tag, and I'm going to put some text inside that p tag. So what I want to do very simply here is use JavaScript to get the content of that paragraph, so to get the text within that paragraph. And to do that I need to give the paragraph a name. We use classes and IDs, exactly the same as with CSS in JavaScript. Now we focus on IDs because normally in JavaScript you want to do something with a particular element. So IDs are ideal because, as we learned in chapter 2, they only refer to a single element on the page. You can't have more than one element with the same ID. So we'll just call it text for now. There we go. So that's our ID. So we could use that to style it as well, but we're going to use it to refer to it in our JavaScript script. Okay, here we go. So we use we start with the word document. Now document refers in JavaScript to the whole web page itself, so the whole content of this document that we're looking at. And then within that document we want to look at this particular element, so we use the dot to refer to a sub element within the document. And we're going to get this element by its ID, so we use the command get element by ID. Notice the capitalization there, that's really important. We always start JavaScript functions with a small letter, and then the beginning of each word is capitalized after that, so get element by ID. And you'll notice that makes it reasonably easy to read compared to doing everything lowercase or doing everything uppercase or something like that. So that's how we refer to a function within JavaScript. So get element by ID, and then we want to give the function the actual ID of our paragraph, which is text there. So now we've got the element. We now want to do something with that element. So what we'll do is get the inner HTML of that element. So what that does is it goes to the document, the whole page here, and then it gets the element by its ID. So it gets the element with an ID of text, and it gets the inner HTML, so the actual content of that paragraph tag in this case. Now what are we going to do with that? For now, let's just alert it. There we go. So what this should do is create an alert box with the content of the element with the ID of text. Let's just save that, give it a try. There it is, fantastic. So what we've done there is reasonably good. We've got the content of this ID tag, and we have alerted it. So we've now been able to refer to an element on the page in our JavaScript down here. Now we can actually go further than that, and we can change the content of that page. So now what I'm doing, instead of alerting the content of the page, I'm setting the content of that paragraph tag to some more text. So let's save that, see how it goes. Fantastic. So as soon as the page is loaded, the JavaScript is actually changing the content of the page. Now while we're here, we'll just have a quick look at JavaScript comments. JavaScript uses the same language as many other programming languages when it comes to comments. We use a double slash like that. This is a comment, and then everything on that line will then be commented out. So it will be something for future coders or people that want to look at the code of your site to read, or for yourself to keep track of what a particular bit of code is doing, but it won't actually be calculated as code and processed. If you want to do a multi-line comment, you can do a slash and a star, and then a star and a slash, and then anything within those lines will be considered a comment, a multi-line comment. Excellent. And you can see that the Text Wrangler text editor that I'm using here does really nice color coding and then grays out the comments. So you can see just at a glance that this is a comment. It's not going to be calculated. It's not going to be processed. So in the first video on this part of the course, we saw how to respond to a click on a button in our HTML document. We want to do the same thing here, but separate out the JavaScript from the rest of the HTML. So let's get our button back. Put some tempting text in there. Like that. This time we're going to need to give the button an ID. I'm going to call it my button with a capital B there, and this ID allows us to refer to that button in the JavaScript that we're going to write here. Okay, so I'm actually going to use the text that we wrote before because it's a very similar structure. So we start with document again and get element by ID. So this time we're going to use the my button ID to refer to this button. Now this time, instead of inner HTML, we want to use the onClick command. So it's the same function, the same word that we used when we did it inline, but this time we're going to separate it out. So what do we want to do on click? Well, we want to do some kind of function, and that function is going to be contained within the curly brackets or curly braces there. So just to summarize what we've done, we've got the document, which refers to the whole page itself. We've got the get element by ID instruction, and then we're referring to the my button ID, which gets us this button here. And then we're using the onClick command to run a function when that button is clicked. At the moment the function is empty, but let's make it do something extremely basic. So we'll have a simple alert, the same as before. Okay, let's see if that works. There's my button. We click it, fantastic. So we've achieved what we wanted to. We can now interact with a website and do something when a button is clicked. Great, so far we've learned how to access an element and change that element's HTML, and also how to make a web page respond to a click using JavaScript. So let's try and put that together and practice a little bit of what we've done so far. I'm going to start by combining the two tricks that we've learned so far to respond to a click and change the text of a div when we click on a button. So let's see how that might work. We've got our button, and let's put our div in. With some text in it. Okay. And what we want to do is when that button is clicked, we want to change the text of the div. So let's change the ID because we're going to have several different buttons here. We'll call this text changer. and we'll change the text within that button to change first div text, and then we'll give this div an ID of first div, like that. Okay, so we've already got some handy JavaScript here which we're going to use. Instead of my button, we want the ID to now be text changer, and this does the same thing that it did before. It accesses the document and then an ID element within that document, that is this button up here, and then on click it accesses this function. At the moment it alerts hi, but we want to change that to change the text of this first div element up here. So we do the same thing. We start with document, get element by ID, and first div. So now we're accessing this first div element here, and if you remember, we use the command inner HTML, and we want to set the inner HTML to, this is awesome. Okay, let's have a look at that. Okay, so there's our button, change first div text, and this is our div with our text in it. Fantastic. I think this is great. Hopefully you're beginning to see the power of what JavaScript can do. We can affect and change any bit of a website with any kind of interaction. Okay, let's just see a couple of more things we can do. Underneath that div, we'll put another button. And this one we'll call text appender. And we'll call it append some text. So appending text means adding text to some text which is already there. Simple as that. So I'll have another div. We'll call this second div. And we'll have JavaScript is ... Close that div. So what we want to do is to create a new script which, when the text appender button is clicked, that appends some text, so adds some text to the second div. So I'm going to copy and paste this script here, because it's a very similar script that we want to do. So document get element by ID, it's not text changer this time, it's text appender. And on click equals function, I want to keep that the same. And this time I want to take the second div, inner HTML, but I want to add to that, I want to append to it. So I want to get the actual inner HTML itself, and then I want to add to that some new text. So I'm just going to extend this so you can see that slightly better. Let's just run through what that does. So document get element by ID, second div, inner HTML. That gets the HTML of the second div document and sets it equal to what it is at the moment. So document get element by ID, second div, plus the word great. So that will take what it is at the moment and add the word great to it. Let's have a look at that. So append some text. JavaScript is great. Excellent. And for our last trick, we're going to do a similar thing, but we're going to add some text to an empty div. So let's have a new button. We're going to call this text creator. Slash button. And then we're just going to have an empty div, which will give an ID of empty div. Okay, so if we have a look at that, the div is there, but we can't see it. There's no content in it at the moment. So let's copy and paste. Maybe try this out for yourself first if you can. So this time we're going to get the element text creator being our button, and when that is clicked we want to get the element empty div, and we want to set the inner HTML to something. Just to show you that it doesn't have to be pure text, we can actually add HTML to this div. So we'll do a very simple unordered list, and we'll add a couple of list elements, cat and dog. So just to remind yourself the structure of the HTML here, we've got an unordered list tag and then a list item tag of cat, closing the list item tag, and another list item tag with dog within it, and then we're closing the unordered list. So that should create that unordered list when I click that button. There it is, fantastic. So we've done 3 different things there. We've changed some text when you click that button. We've appended some text, so added to what is already there when you click that button. And then we've created some text, there we go, which is actually some HTML this time with a bullet point list. Welcome to your first JavaScript mini challenge. So this is going to be a pretty simple one that just gives you an opportunity to use the JavaScript that we've learned so far, and also a bit of the CSS and HTML from previous chapters as well. So the challenge is extremely straightforward. All I want you to do is display a red circle on the screen, which then disappears when you click on it. Simple as that. Okay, so pause this video and have a go, and then when you come back, if you want to, you can watch me and see how I completed the challenge. Done that? Great. Okay, well, here's how I would do it, and you can compare what you've done to my method. I'm going to take what we had at the end of the last video, and I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to call it circle, and end it there. And then in the header tag I'm going to create a style area, and I'm going to refer to my circle ID element and give it the necessary properties to make it a circle, a red circle no less. So we'll give it a width of 200 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and we'll give it a border radius of 100 pixels and a background color of red. Okay, I'm just going to save that and refresh. Okay, looks good. Of course, when I click on my circle, it doesn't do anything. So I just need to use my JavaScript that I've got here. So I want to refer to the circle element and then change that to circle element. So document get element by ID circle. When I click on that, I want it to change the display style to none. So that should do the trick. Excellent. I hope you managed to complete it as well. I'll see you in the next video. Now I'm going to introduce you to variables in JavaScript. Now variables are extremely powerful and allow you to do a lot of really quite advanced things, but for the moment we're just going to see how they work and how we can use them in our code. So to start off, I'm going to start with my challenge result from last time, and all I'm going to do is make it so that instead of changing this particular ID, so first div, I'm going to set that to a variable, and I'm going to quote that variable in the function. So first of all, I've got to create a variable. So I'm going to say var, That's the way that we create a variable in JavaScript, and I'm going to call it div ID, like that. So div ID, this is the ID of the div that we're referring to when we want to get rid of this display here. And I'm going to give it a value of first div. So I've created a variable, called it div ID, and given it a value of first div. And then if I refer to div ID in there, then that just does exactly the same as what we did before. So we've got a variable of div ID with a value of first div, and then we're referring to it here. So very simply, I've just reconstructed what I had before, but using a variable this time. So let's just check that that works. Great. It works fine. So that's all good. Now, there's another way to kind of store variables in JavaScript. It's not really variables per se. We're not actually using the var, but I'm going to show you at this point anyway because it's quite fun. What we do is use an input. So let's say we have an input of an ID is going to be my input, and it's going to have a type of text. So the standard input there. And then what we can do is change when we click the button, change the content of this first div to whatever you've entered in the input. And then essentially the input is acting as a variable that the user can control and the program can access to set as some value. So let's see how we might do that. First of all, let's change this button up there. And in fact, I think I'll copy and paste my input and put it at the top so that it all makes a bit more sense. So I've got my input there, the button, and then the text. Let's have a look there. So there's my text, there's my input, and there's my button. So how am I going to do this? Let's keep my variable, but this time I'm going to call it new text, because this is going to be the variable that holds the new text. And I'm going to set it equal to document.getElement by ID, and then we want my input to be the ID because we're talking about the input up here, and we want value. So this will set the new text to be equal to the document.getElement by ID, my input value, so the value of this input up here. Now, we then need to refer to that over here. So let's get rid of this div ID. So we're now, when the styles changer button is clicked, we're going to change the inner HTML of the first div ID. So we've got first div there, inner HTML, and we're going to set that equal to our variable new text. Okay, I'll just add something else to this. We're going to give it a default value. So we'll just say test for the moment. So that value equals test just means that the default value of the input will be test. So let's see what happens. So we've got test there, change the text, excellent, that works fine. Now what happens if you try and type in your own text? It doesn't do anything. Interesting. Now take a moment and have a look at the code over here and see if you can see why it might not do anything. Any ideas? Well, what's going on is we've set this value of new text here, but then when this function happens, the new text value doesn't actually update. So it's actually still set to the original value of my input, which was test, which is why when we try and change the text, it's just changing it to test every time, which looks like it's not changing at all. So what we need to do is put a new line into our function here, which updates the value of new text. So I'm just going to copy and paste that part of that line. I don't need the var this time because the variable has already been defined. So the variable is defined, all I need to do is set it to the value of the input again. So now that should work. Let's have a look. So if I update that, works great. Testing 1, 2, 3. Brilliant. Okay, so we're using the input there as a variable, essentially, that the user can control. And we're using a JavaScript variable of new text, which we're setting to the value of the input value in order to change the HTML of the first div. So we've seen variables in JavaScript. We're now going to look at arrays. Arrays are very similar to variables, but they allow you to store several different values within the same object. So within the same array, essentially. Now this sounds a bit weird until you see how it works. So let's see how this might work. So first I'm going to define my array. So let's call it my array, like that. And I'm going to call it new array, like this. So this is the basic way in JavaScript to define an array. You just create a variable as before, so var, call it whatever you like, and then make it equal to new array, like that. And then we can set specific values of the array to have values of their own. So let's say we want some different types of food. So we can set my array 0 to pizza using those square brackets there, and my array 1 to chocolate. Okay, hopefully that gives you the basic idea. So my array can have lots and lots of different values, an infinite number of values, each of which can be set to a value of their own. So my array 0, my array 1, etc., etc. So you might use this to list all of the users that are registered on your database, or all of the divs in a particular web page, or whatever it might be. There are lots and lots of different uses for arrays. Let's just see how we might use it in some code. So what have we got here? We've got our input and our value, so let's get rid of our input because we're not talking about that at the moment. So we've got our button ID and just some text. So maybe we want to change the text to the value of my array 0, that is pizza, when the button is clicked. So we don't need this anymore. And we just want to say, so when the button is clicked, we want to get the first div by its ID, and we want to set the inner HTML to my array 0. That should set it equal to pizza. Let's see. It does. Fantastic. And similarly, we can change it to my array 1, which would change it to chocolate. Great. Okay, just something to point out at this stage. With a variable, if you want to know at any time what the value of that variable is, it's quite easy to find out. You just display it or set the inner HTML of some div to that value. With an array, it's not quite so straightforward because you can't show all of the values of an array. So at this point, we'll introduce something called console log. So what I'm going to do is log all the values of my array in what's called the console. So we've created a new array called my array. We've set the value of my array 0 to pizza and the value of my array 1 to chocolate. And now we've logged in the console the value of my array. Now if I run that, nothing happens. So where did this log take place? Well, in any browser, in the developer section of that browser, you can see the console. So if we have a look here, you'll notice that it's displayed our array there. So there it is. It's an array which has a value of 2. That means that there's 2 different values stored within that array, one of pizza and one of chocolate. So console log is really handy if you're doing some debugging or developing a page and you want to see what the value of a variable or an array is at any given point, or just to leave a message for yourself. You can log it in the console and then you'll be able to see it there, but it won't actually be displayed on the page. Now it's worth noting a couple of other ways that we can create arrays and one or two other things that we can do with them. So first of all, I'll show you a shorthand way of creating an array. So underneath this console log, I'm going to create another array, but this time I'm going to define it straight away. So I'm not going to just call it a new array and then put some values in. I'm going to put some values in straight away. So what we do is say my other array equals, and then we open the square brackets and put our different values in double quotes. So rain, sunshine for this one. There we go. So my other array is rain and sunshine. So the first value, the 0 value, will be rain and the 1 value will be sunshine. Let's just have a look in the log. Make sure that that's worked. My other array, and just to avoid confusion, I'll get rid of this line. So we've only got one console log. Okay, so now if we refresh the page, you can see it's displayed rain and sunshine there. Okay, I'm now going to show you a couple of other techniques to add and remove elements from arrays. The first one is push, which is a very simple command which allows you to add an element at the end of an array. So let's see how that works. So let's say we've got rain and sunshine in our array, we want to have snow there as well. So all we do is we say my other array push snow. So that push command will add snow onto the end of the array. So the array will now be rain, sunshine, snow. Let's just see that. There we go, rain, sunshine, and snow. But what if we want to remove elements from the array? Well, let's see, we can do that as well. We use a function called splice for that. So my other array dot splice. Now remember that arrays generally start at 0. So the first item in an array is the 0th item, and then chocolate being the second item is my array 1, etc. So it starts at 0 and goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 0 item here would be rain, the 1 item would be sunshine, and the other item would be the 2 item would be snow. So if we want to remove the sunshine item, then we would splice the item number 1, and we only want to remove 1 item. So we use my other array splice 1, 1. Let's have a little look at that. Okay, so now sunshine's gone. If we want to remove sunshine and snow, then we would change it to my other array splice 1, 2. So we'd start at the number 1 and we remove 2 items. So that should leave us with just rain. There we go. We can also use the splice command to add in elements in the middle of the array. The push command is great for adding elements at the end, but we might want to add an element in the middle of an array. So let's say we want to add an element after the rain item and before the sunshine item. So what we'll say is we want to add it just before sunshine, so we'll keep our number 1 because it's sunshine that we're referring to. We don't want to remove any items this time, but we do want to add one in, and we'll add hail. Okay, so this means add it just before the number 1 item, so just before sunshine. Don't remove any, so a 0 there, and then the item that we want to add is hail. Let's just see what that does. Great, so we've got our hail in there before the sunshine. If we wanted the hail after sunshine, then we'd just change that to a number 2. See how that works? So now we've got rain, sunshine, hail, and snow. We can add more than 1 item in. Call it cloudy. And then we've got hail and cloudy both added there. So the splice command is quite powerful if you want to manipulate arrays. The last thing I'm going to show you is the length command, which can be useful. If you've created an array and you don't know how long that array is, how many elements it's got in it, then you can use the array.length command. And let's just see what that does. There we go. It's return the number 5 because there are 5 elements in that array: rain, sunshine, snow, hail, and cloudy. So this is where things start to get really fun. If statements are a core staple of programming in any language, and we're going to start off looking at how they work in JavaScript. So very simple. I'm going to get rid of all of this to avoid any confusion for the moment, and then we'll add some back in a minute. So we're just going to have some JavaScript. So let's create a variable. We'll call it x, and we'll give it a value of 1. So variable x is equal to 1. So very simple statement can say if, and then a bracket, and the bracket will enclose our if statement. So if x is equal to 1, now I've got 2 equal signs there. I'll explain why there are 2 in a moment, but let's just see how this works first. Then we're going to put some curly brackets or braces in there to indicate the limit of what we do. If x is equal to 1, then we'll alert a statement that says x is 1. Okay, very simple. Let's have a look and see what that does. Unsurprisingly, it alerts x is equal to 1, because it is. Now, first of all, why have we got this double equals there? If we have a single equals, what that will do is it will set x to be equal to 1. And we don't want that. We want to test whether or not x is equal to 1. So we need a double equals to tell the browser that what we're trying to do here is to test whether or not x is equal to 1. We're not trying to set x equal to 1. So remember that a lot of common early programming mistakes come from using 1 equals by mistake instead of 2. If you're testing whether or not a statement is true, you need 2 equal signs. So first of all, we've got that. So if x is equal to 1, then alert this. What if x is not equal to 1? Well, we want to do something else maybe. So we use the else command, and we'll just alert x is not 1. So nice and straightforward. After the if command is complete, we have an else statement, and this will be completed if x is not equal to 1. So let's just run that for the moment. Okay, x is 1. Fine. Now, what if we set x is equal to 2? Then we get this other result here. So we're using our if statement to work out whether or not something is true. And if it's true, then we'll take one course of action, and if it's not, we'll take another. Let's just have a quick look at how we might use that to interact with the user in some way. We'll just make a very simple example. So we'll have a question, what is the weather? And we'll input the answer. So ID equals, we'll call that weather. Close that, and we'll have a button again. We'll call it my button. And we'll use the text submit to submit the result. So take a moment to see if you can type in a command to do something when the My Button button is clicked. Done that? Okay. Hopefully it looks something like this. Document.getElement by ID, my button dot onClick is equal to function, and then curly brackets there. And all we're going to do is say if the value of the input, so that's document.getElements by ID weather dot value. So we're testing whether or not the value of the weather input over here is equal to rain. And if it is, we'll alert that it's raining. And if it's not, we'll alert it's not raining. So a very simple idea there. Now notice we've got two closed curly brackets there. That's because we've got one for this function and one for the if statement. So just like with the CSS divs, it's nice to keep everything indented, and you can see that that makes a lot more sense what we've got here, that this lines up with the beginning of the if statement and again there, and so we can see that this part here, the if statement, is contained within the onClick function there. So let's just see how that works. We've got our button, so let's say it's sunny. Okay, so the system knows it's not raining. If we put rain in here, we should get the result, it's raining. Okay, now of course this isn't a very intelligent system, because if we put raining here, then it will say that it's not raining because it only understands the word rain. In fact, if we put rain in capital letters, it will also say that it's not raining because this if statement is case sensitive. So that means that even if it's the same word, if the case is different, so if one has got capitals and one has got small letters, then it will not see those as being identical, as not being the same. In this video, I'm going to introduce a few ideas of how we can use JavaScript mathematically. So a few ways that we can combine variables, add variables together, and I'm going to do this in the form of creating a little game where you guess how many fingers, metaphorically speaking, the computer is holding up. So essentially the computer is going to generate a random number between 1 and 5, and you're going to try and guess that number. So let's see how we might do this. We're going to start off by defining a few variables and just looking at how we can manipulate numerical values of variables. So let's define our variable again. We'll call it x again, and for a start we'll say x is equal to 5. So how would we do things like add some numbers to x or manipulate x in other ways? Let's just see a few simple things that we can do. So we can alert the value of x plus 1. So with any luck, this will alert 6. So x is 5, so x plus 1 is 6. Of course, we can add whatever value we like to x. So x plus 65, 5 plus 65 is 70. We can also multiply x by a certain value. So maybe we want to do 3 times x. We use the asterisk, so shift 8 to multiply values together. There we go, so 3 times x is 15. So those are the basic mathematical functions. We can do more complicated maths, so things like powers, for example. So if we wanted to do 5 to the power of 3, now we introduce the JavaScript math function here. So any complicated math function is contained within this math statement here. So if we wanted to do a power, we would do math.pow. Let's say for the moment that we want to do x to the power of 3. So 5 to the power of 3 is 125. With any luck, that's the answer that we'll get. Great. There we go. So math.pow x comma 3 does x to the power 3. We could also do 5 squared, so that would be 5 to the power of 2, 25. So how about creating a random number for our how many fingers game? Well, we use the math.random function. We don't want the 5, 2 anymore, but we do want the brackets after the function. And let's see what that does. It's given us a pretty random looking number there, 0.23 something. Let's do it again. 0.59, 0.97, etc. So we're getting a different number every time. It's pretty random looking, or at least it's random enough for our purposes. Notice that it's always 0. something. This random function always generates a random number between 0 and 1. So if you want to get a random number between, say, 0 and 5 that we want, you need to manipulate that original random number. It's not trivial, but it's certainly doable. So let's see how we're going to do that. So first of all, we'll change our code to let x be equal to our random number, and then we'll just alert x at the end, just to make sure that that still does the same thing. It just means that we're not having all of our code stored in that alert area, which will get a bit confusing. So we've got our random number between 0 and 1. In order to change it to a random number between 0 and 5, we're going to need to multiply that number by 5. So we're going to say x is equal to 5 times x. So a slightly confusing statement initially, but all we're saying is take x, multiply it by 5, and set that value to x. So we're basically multiplying x by 5. So let's see what effect that has. So now we're getting some bigger random numbers, 1.4, 1.5, 4.2, 3.8, 1.1, etc. So we're going to get random numbers that go all the way down to 0 and all the way up to 5. But we want a whole number of fingers. So we want to convert this to a whole number, and the way we're going to do that is to use the floor function. So x is equal to math.floor x. Now let's see what effect that has. So now we've got a nice whole number, 4 again, 1, 0, 0, 3, 2, etc. So what floor does is it rounds x down to the nearest whole number below x. So if we've got a range of numbers that could go from 0 to all the way up to 5, then our math floor function is going to return a whole number which could be 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now notice that 5 is not an option here because we can't get any numbers bigger than 5. So actually, if we want to have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as our options, we're going to need to multiply x by 6. Because we've got 6 different options there, not 5. We've got no fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now what we've got is a random number that will go between 0 and 5. Great. So you can try that out a few times and make sure that it doesn't go above 5. But now we've got our random number. We're going to need to give the user an opportunity to guess what our random number is. So we'll change our paragraph text to how many fingers am I holding up? And we'll change the ID of the answer input to answer. So now that we've got our random number, all we need to do is to check whether our random number is equal to the number that the user has inputted. So we want to activate our function when the submit button is clicked. So you should know how to do that by now. Document.get element by ID, my button, on click equals function, and then enclose everything else in curly brackets. Let's just move those in. We don't need the alert anymore. So what we want to do is test whether x is equal to the value that the user has put in their answer. So let's just see how that works. If x is equal to, and remember we need the double equals here because we don't want to set x equal to something, we want to test whether or not x is equal to something. And we want document get element by ID answer dot value. So this now checks whether or not the input is equal to the random number. So if it is, we want to alert that's correct. And if it's not, we want to alert that's wrong. Okay. Let's see how this works. So I'm going to start with a 1. Unsurprisingly, I've got it wrong. Let's change my guess to a 2. Still wrong. I'm only going to be right 1 in 6 times. Aha! I've got it right. Fantastic. Okay, just one thing to add to that, to make this game a bit more fun. It would be nice to know what the number was. Otherwise you kind of feel that the computer's just lying to you. So if it's wrong, let's say that's wrong. The number was, in fact, let's say my number. And then we want to put the number on the end of that. So all we do is plus x. And that will then say my number was, and then it will give whatever the number was. So let's guess 4. That's wrong. My number was 2. And now it's at least fairly convincing. That was a 2 again. Two again. Oops. That's not a good guess. 4. Got to get it right at some point. No. 1. Okay. I could be here for a while. I won't show you all of the possibilities. So we've made quite a nice little game there. Maybe our first website that's actually worth sharing and worth playing with. Feel free to play around with that a little bit. You could change the number to make it more or less easy to get the correct number. Or you can change the rules a little bit. You could put in an array that has certain different values of maybe types of food, and you have to guess what the computer's favorite food is. There's quite a lot of mileage there, which would allow you to practice your arrays and variables a little bit. So play around with it, post whatever you've done in the forums, and I'll be really pleased to take a look. So along with if statements, loops are one of the fundamental techniques of programming. And essentially a loop is just doing something several times and looping through the results. So let's see a very simple loop and how we might set it up. The type of loop that we're looking at in this video is a for loop. There's also something called a while loop, which is something that we'll look at in the next video. So for now, we'll start by using the word for. So for takes us through a cycle of values of a particular variable. And the way we do that is we create a variable. So we normally call it I. I is our standard counter variable. So I is equal to 1. So that's stating the initial value of I. So I is going to be our counter variable that's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 through this loop, and we're setting it initially to start at 1. And we have a semicolon. So let's set the upper value for what I can go up to in our loop. We'll say I is less than 5. So that means that this loop will continue as long as this statement is true. So as long as I is less than 5. So essentially I is going to go 1, 2, 3 and 4. It's not going to actually hit 5 because we want I to be less than 5, or at least we've set that as our rule. If we wanted it to go all the way up to 5, we could change it to less than or equal to 5, like that, but we'll keep it as less than 5 for the moment. And the last bit of our for loop statement tells the increments that we should increase I in. So the standard one is I++. That means I is going to go up by 1 each time. So 1, 2, 3, 4. We might want I to go up by 2 each time, in which case we'd say I equals I plus 2, like that. If we want I to decrease by 1 each time, then we'd say I equals I minus 1. So this is essentially this part. So this part is essentially the rule that takes I from the previous value to the next value. And we want I to just increase by 1, which is the usual thing to do. So we're going to start I at 1. We've defined the variable I using var and set I equal to 1. We've defined the values for which this loop will be continued. So it will continue as long as I is less than 5. And we're going to do it with I increasing 1 by 1 each time. Okay, that's the end of our loop. And then the action that we want to take, we then put inside curly brackets as usual. And for now, we're just going to do a very simple alert I. So let's see what this does. So it starts by alerting the number 1, then alerts the number 2, number 3, number 4, and then it stops. So that's what we expected. Let's just try out a couple of other things. So we might want I to go up in 3s, let's say. So I equals I plus 3. Freshen that, so it starts at 1. What's the next one going to be? It's 4, because we're going up in 3s every time, and then 7, and then it stops, because the next one would be 10, which isn't less than 9. So that will do for our introduction to for loops. Let's just very simply see how we might use this in a website. It's a bit of a trivial example, but it'll do the job. So we're going to create So we're going to create an array. Call it my array, and we'll set it to some good old types of food. Why not crisps? So feel free to use completely different values in your array if you'd like. And then what we're going to do is just cycle through the different values in this array and alert those. So let's say we're going to start with I being 0, because remember the array counter starts at 0, so this is going to go 0, 1, 2. We want to keep going as long as I is less than the number of items in that array. Now, can you remember how to get that? I hope you did. It's myArray.length. So this gives you the length of the array. This is going to be 3 in this case, because we've got 3 items in the array. So we want I to be less than that, not less than or equal to, because we're starting at 0. So this is going to go 0, 1, 2, which is what we want. And we want I to increase by 1 each time. So first of all, let's just do that. That's no good, is it? I'm alerting the number itself. I don't want to do that. I want to alert the array value. So let's try that instead, but I don't want 0, I want I. So that should alert the ith array item. So when I is 0, we'll get the first value, which is pizza. When I is 1, we'll get the second value, which is chocolate. And when I is 2, we'll get the third value, which is crisps. There we go, pizza, chocolate, crisps. Fantastic. As a final option here, I'm just going to show you how we might put that into an area on the page. So we might not want to alert all the values in the array, especially if it's a particularly long array. So what we're going to do is create a new variable, and we'll call it an array string. Now, a string is just a collection of numbers and letters and punctuation, essentially. So pizza is a string, chocolate is a string, crisps is a string. So what we're going to do is take these 3 values in an array and combine them into a single string. See what I mean by that? So instead of alerting the value, we want to add the value of the array to the array string. So we're going to take array string and put it equal to what it was before plus my array I. So let's see what that's going to do. If we loop through it in our heads, it's going to start when array string is empty because we haven't actually given it any value yet. So it's just going to set it to an empty string plus my array 0, which is pizza. So after one loop, array string is going to be equal to pizza. After 2 loops, it's going to be equal to pizza chocolate because it's just going to put chocolate on the end. And after 3 loops, it's going to be pizza chocolate crisps. Okay, so let's give this P an ID. We can get rid of those because we don't need those for the moment. Well, let's call it array string and get rid of the text there. And then we want to make our array string, whatever the text is there, appear in this paragraph. So I'll give you a moment to try and do that yourself. Did you manage it? I hope you did something like document.getElement by ID array string dot inner HTML equals array string. So this should just display the words pizza, chocolate, crisps. Let's have a look. There we go. Now we've got an undefined in there. That's interesting. That's good. Yeah, I like that. That's because initially the array string was indeed undefined because we hadn't set it to anything. So let's set it to a blank string. So equals and then a pair of quotation marks there, and that should get rid of our undefined. There we go. So that was the problem there. That was an interesting little issue. It's not very nice having it all in one word like that, so let's add a comma, or a space at least, between the words. There we go. So this is a quite handy technique for displaying all of the items in an array if you want to just see on the screen what that array is. So while loops are similar to for loops, but they work slightly differently. As a reminder, for loops have an initial value of their counter variable, and then an instruction to usually increase that counter variable one by one until this middle statement is no longer true. With a while loop, it works slightly differently. So let's see how this might work. We can actually recreate this whole bit of code in a while loop reasonably easily. And the way we do it is this. So first of all, we define our counter variable outside of the loop this time, and then we change for to while, and then we get rid of that initial statement because we don't need it anymore, get rid of the last statement because we don't need that anymore, and then we put an instruction to increment I inside the loop. So just to run that through, we're initially setting I to 0, and then as long as, that's what you should think of while as meaning, as long as I is less than the length of my array, then it will continue to do this code. And obviously we're increasing I by 1 each time there, so it effectively does the same thing as our for loop. Let's just check that. There we go, we've got the same thing. So normally they are interchangeable, but in some circumstances you might want to use a while loop. While loops are particularly useful when you don't know quite how long the loop is going to be. So what we're going to do here is try and do the reverse of our number guessing game. So instead of you guessing how many fingers the computer was holding up, we're going to get the computer to guess how many fingers you're holding up. Might sound a bit weird, but it'll make sense. Let's see how this is going to work. So we're going to start with an input, and we'll call it my number. And we'll have a question in a paragraph tag. How many fingers are you holding up? Okay, and then you write in a number from 1 to 5. And we'll have a button with an ID of guess. And close that button. So just to see how that looks, we're doing it differently this time. So if you guess 2, what we want the computer to do is to guess randomly until the computer gets it right. And that's quite a nice use for a while loop. So let's get rid of all of this and start our code. So first of all, we need to have a function which we're going to enact when the button is pressed. Again, I'll give you a moment or two to write that down yourself. Okay, hopefully you wrote document.getElement by ID guess dot onClick equals function. There we go. Okay, so what we want the computer to do is to make several guesses at a random number until they get the right one. So how do we do that? Let's create a variable x, and it's going to be an opportunity here to remind ourselves how we create a random number generator. So see if you can remember how to do that. Hopefully you said math.random. Okay. Now that creates a number between 0 and 1. We want a number between 0 and 5, but we're going to round it down like we did before. So let's say x equals 6 times x, just like we did before, and then x equals math dot floor x. Okay, let's just alert x. I like doing things like that because it allows a chance to just make sure that we're in the right ballpark here. So we've got a couple of 2s, 0s. Okay, this looks like it's doing the right thing. Great. Okay. So now we need to check whether or not x is equal to our particular value or not. So if document.getElement by ID and we want the my number value this time. So that's going to be the value of the number that we put in the box. Equals 2 equals this time because we're testing whether or not it's equal to is equal to x. Then we'll alert. I got it. It was a, and then we'll put the number on the end there. So just to check what's happened there, if the value that you've put or that the user has put in that box is equal to x, that is the guess, then the computer will say, I got it, it was a whatever that might be. Now what if the computer didn't get it? We want some code there. So this is just going to do that whole thing once. What we want to do is to loop this round and round until the computer gets it right. So let's put this all inside a while loop. In fact, I think we need to do some indenting here. Keep track of everything. So while, and then for the moment we'll just put empty brackets. Start and close that. Okay, that looks nice. So what we want to keep doing is looping round this until this is no longer true. So what we'll do is we'll create a variable called gotIt. And we'll set it initially to false. Now this is a new type of variable called a Boolean variable. You can look that up and find out a bit more about it if you want, but for now we'll just use it. It's essentially a variable that can be true or false. That's only two possible values. Right, so we want to keep going through this loop until the gotIt variable turns out to be true. So we'll initially set it to false, and then we'll set our instruction for our while loop to keep going as long as gotIt is equal to false. And then when we've actually got it, we'll say gotIt is equal to true. Excellent. Looking good. So it would be nice to keep track of how many guesses the computer took to get there. So let's create a new variable called guesses. Set it initially equal to 1 because the computer's got to take at least one guess. And then guesses plus plus. Remember, that just increases guesses by 1. So if the computer gets it wrong, it just increases the number of guesses each time. Okay. Now, one thing we don't want to do is to define this variable each time we go through the loop. We only want to define it once, so we'll define it at the top there and then just make a new random number out of it each time. Okay, that looks good. So all we need to do now is to add an instruction at the end to tell the player how many guesses it took for the computer to get it. Let's give it a go. So we'll alert gotIt. It was an X. So X is going to be the value. We could just as well use the document getElementById my number as well if we wanted to. So it was a whatever that number is. It only took me, and the guesses variable, guesses. Okay, let's give it a go. So I'm going to say 3. Got it. It was a 3. You got it right. It only took me 8 guesses. Okay, let's see how long it generally takes the computer. 5 guesses. 11 guesses. Gosh, the computer's not very good at this. 13 guesses, etc, etc. Okay, so quite a fun game and a good use of our random instruction that we learned a few videos ago, and also of while loops. Now, one thing to really be aware of here is you've got to be very careful of while loops that could possibly go on forever, because they're likely to crash your user's computer. And this is definitely one of those. So this will work fine as long as you put a number 0, 1, 2, 3 or 5 in this box. If you don't put a number 0, 1, 2, 3 or 5 in this box, then the computer will never get it right, so it will go on forever. Now, some browsers will treat this quite well and they won't crash, but some browsers will just completely crash. So there really should be an instruction somewhere that if guesses reaches 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or whatever you think is reasonable, then get out of this loop and do something else and just say I give up or something like that. So I'll leave that as an exercise for you to have a go at doing, but in its current form this program works but is not great at dealing with errors if the computer guesses something like a 7 or an 8. Congratulations on making it to the last video in the JavaScript section of this course. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've looked at variables, we've looked at if statements, we've looked at 2 different kinds of loops, and various ways of manipulating the style and the content of web pages. So you're well on your way on knowing enough JavaScript to actually make interactive websites that your users are going to love. The last thing we're going to look at here is functions, which is a nice way to compress your code, make it more efficient and easier to manage, especially when you've got a large amount of code to deal with. So let's see how a function might work. At its basic level, we define a function by just using the word function, and then we have the name of a function. So let's say we'll have a function called alert me. And that function is just going to have an alert box with a message of some sort in it. So I've used the conventional naming method, so alert is all small lowercase, and the capital M for me there separates out the words quite nicely. I'm going to use a pair of brackets there. I'll talk more about those in a second. And then, as usual, I'm going to use the curly brackets or braces to contain the text of my function. So all this function is going to do is say, "Hi Rob." That's it. Very simple. Now, if I run that code, nothing happens. That's because this function isn't actually being activated. It's not being done. So to do it, all I do is just use the name of the function followed by brackets. And then there we go. There it happens. So in this particular case, it's not that much more convenient to do alert me than it is to just write alert hi Rob. But in a lot of cases, there might be things that you want to do again and again and again, and you don't want to write out the code for those things again and again and again. And more importantly, there might be things that you want to do again and again and again that you want to be in a position to update or change very easily. And if you've written it out 10 times in your code, not only is that a big waste of space in your code, but also it means that you have to update it 10 times. So functions are very useful for any type of code that you have to write out again and again. Indeed, it's a general coding principle that you should never write a command more than once in your statement. If you're rewriting code or copying and pasting code, then you'll probably be better off using a function to compress it and keep it neater. So just to show you a few other ways that you can use functions, you can have a function which works with particular variables. So let's say we want a function that's going to add two numbers together. We definitely don't need a function that does that, but let's see if we can make one. So we'll call it adding. Now we're going to use inside these brackets, we're going to have two letters, A and B, and they will refer to the two numbers that we want to add together. So whenever I use the adding function, I'm going to have to give the function two numbers. So let's say 3 and 4. So let's see how that works. So alert, I want to alert A plus B. Does that work? It does. It works. Alert 7. Fantastic. So just to check, 3 add 54 is indeed 57. Great. So what I'm doing there is providing the numbers to a function, and that's a really powerful thing to do, especially when you use variables in with that. You can actually make extremely powerful functions that work no matter what variable you're putting into it. Okay, a final thing that you should be aware of with functions is that you might not want to alert the value, but you might just want to get the value somehow. So the way you do that is instead of using the alert command, you use return. So that means that the function will return this value. So if I want to add 3 and 54 using this function, if I now run it, it doesn't do anything. It does the adding, but it doesn't actually show us what the adding is. But maybe I want to change the content of this paragraph tag to the result of that function. How would I do that? Well, let's see. Let's just give it an ID of paragraph for now. And then all I need to do is my usual document.getElements by ID paragraph, and then set the inner HTML of that to the result of the adding function. So doing it this way just gives you a lot more power to do whatever you want with the result of that function. Let's just see if that works. Great, it's worked. And again, we can change that to whatever we like. 176, then we get the result there. So you can make yourself a nice little calculator or something out of that. So that will do for our brief look at functions. We're now going to go along and take on the challenge of the JavaScript section of the course. Congratulations on making it to the end of the JavaScript section of the course. Here we go with our JavaScript website challenge. Here we're going to make a pretty simple but hopefully quite fun game, which will use all of the techniques that we've learned so far, and also a couple of new ones as well. So the way I suggest you do this is you follow along with me, and then you pause the video when I suggest you do, and you do the next bit of the challenge yourself. And then if you want to, you can watch me doing that and compare how you did it to the way that I did it. There's no perfect way. There's lots of different ways to solve various programming problems, but it's always good to see someone else's point of view. So the game that we're going to make is a reactions tester. It's going to put various coloured circles and squares onto the screen, and the user's job is to click on those shapes as quickly as possible. So we're trying to measure how long it takes the user to click on the shape after it's randomly appeared in a random location. So it should be a bit of fun. Should use everything that we've learned. So, should be a bit of fun. Should use pretty much everything that we've learned so far. Let's get started. So the first little challenge is to create a box on the screen. That's all you need to do. So 2 minutes, go away, make a box. Done it? I hope so. Okay, I'm going to do a simple box here. So I'll have an ID of my div. I'll call it a box. And up in the style section, whoops. I'll put in the content for that div. So we'll go for a width of 200 pixels, a height of 200 pixels, and a background color of red. And I'll just get rid of my JavaScript because we don't need that for the moment. Okay, so hopefully you managed something like that. Obviously colors, widths and height can vary, it really doesn't matter. So we want this to appear at some point and we want it to disappear when the user clicks on it. So your next challenge is to just set up a function which makes the square disappear when the user clicks on it. I hope you managed it. This is how I would do it. Document get element by ID box on click equals function, and then document.get element by ID box display, style display is none. Check that that works. Great, it does. I'm just going to show you something else. Another way of doing this is that when you've got a function which responds to a particular element that's been clicked on or whatever it might be, you can use the JavaScript shortcode this to refer to the thing that you're talking about at that time. So this.style display equals none will do the same thing. So that's a really useful trick, and you can look up this in the links I've given you in the docs for the course as well, or you can just Google it and see what comes up. But that's a nice handy shortcode. Right, so we've got our square and it disappears. So we want to make this box appear after a certain random period of time. So we need a command to do that, and the command that we need is set timeout. And what set timeout does is it will enact a function after a certain period of time. So let's see at a basics how much that... So let's see how that might work. So set timeout. We want to give it a function. We want to have some commands in that function, and then we have a comma, and we want to put the number of milliseconds that we want to elapse before this function completes. So if we do 3000 milliseconds, that's equivalent to 3 seconds. So for the moment, let's just do a test. It should alert done after 3 seconds. Hey, great. Okay, fantastic. So your next challenge is to hide the box and to display it only after 3 seconds. Go. Did you manage it? This is the way I would have done it. So to hide the box, I'd set the display is equal to none to start with. I'm still getting my set timeout function there. And then, instead of alerting done, if I want to display the box after 3 seconds, what I want to do is get the box. So document.getElement by ID box, and I want to change the style of that box, and I want to change the display to block. So block is the standard display style for when you want something to show. So I want to change the display from none to block, essentially. So let's see if that works. There we go. It's appeared after 3 seconds. Fantastic. Right, but we want the amount of time between appearing and not appearing to be random. So the next challenge is to change the 3000 seconds to be a random value somewhere between 0 and 5000. Give it a go. Did you manage it? Well, I think you should have done something like this. So define a variable, let's call it time, and set it equal to math.random. Now that's going to give you a random value between 0 and 1. We want a value between 0 and 5000 if we're going to do it randomly between 0 and 5 seconds. So we need to set time is equal to time multiplied by 5000. And we don't need to worry about our floor this time because it doesn't need to be a whole number. It can be a decimal number, and that's fine. So let's just see how that works out. Okay, took a little while that time. Great. I think that looks like it's working fine. Okay, so now it's appearing. What we need to do next is reset everything when the user clicks on it. So at the moment, when the user clicks on it, it disappears. Great. But we're going to want this to happen again when the user clicks on it, and it to appear after a random time again. So my next challenge for you is to figure out how to do that. Did you manage it? I think you should have done something like this. So I'm going to create a variable. Let's call it time, and set it equal to math.random. And then, because we want the time to be between 0 and 5 seconds, i.e. between 0 and 5000 milliseconds, we need to multiply that time by 5000. So we're going from 0 to 1 to 0 to 5000. And then finally, we want to change the delay to whatever that time is. Let's check that out, see if that works. Okay, appeared pretty quickly, that one. A little bit slower that time. Great. Okay, it looks like it's working. So now we want to make it so that whenever the user clicks the box, it doesn't just disappear, but it starts the process of reappearing straight away. So we're going to do that with a function. I'm going to take all of that and make a function for it. And I'm going to call the function makeBox. And let's just indent everything nicely. Okay, lovely. So now when we click the on the box, we don't just want it to disappear, but we want to make it reappear after a certain time. Okay, let's wait for it to appear. Ah, interesting. Right, can you work out what's wrong there? Why is it not appearing? The reason is because we haven't actually made it in the first place. So we have to actually run the makeBox function to make it work. Let's save that, try it again. There we go, so there it appears. Now if we click on it, it disappears. It should then reappear a random amount of time later. Great, okay. Well, I'm happy so far. Obviously we've got a little way to go, but I'm going to stop this video there and start again in the next video. Great, so we've got our box, it appears and disappears, we're making good progress. Now we're going to need some way to work out how long it is between when the box appears and when the user clicks on it. And that will be our measure of how good the user's reactions are. Now, but to do that, we're going to use what's called the date function. Now, this is an extremely powerful function in JavaScript that allows you to work out what the date and time are, and that can be useful for all sorts of activities that you might want to do on your site. But for now, we'll keep it very simple, and we'll use the date.now function. Now, let me show you what that does. So if we alert that, we refresh that, it's a big old number. So that number is actually the number of milliseconds since what's known as the epoch, which is a date back in the 1970s where JavaScript dates are measured from. So we can use that as an excellent way of telling how far two times are apart just by looking at the difference between the date, what's known as a timestamp, so the date timestamps. So what we'll do, we'll have a variable we'll call it clicked time, and another variable called created time. So those are the two variables that we're interested in. So created time is going to be the time when the box is created. So down here, makeBox is the moment at which the box is created. So let's create our created time variable and set it to date.now. So we'll have the created time will be a number which will be a timestamp equivalent to the time when the box appeared. And then we can create or set the value of created, whoops, not created time, clicked time can be set to date.now then. Okay, and so the crucial thing is the difference between those two. So let's create our new variable called, let's say, reaction time. So this will be the number of milliseconds that pass between when the box is created and when the box is clicked on. So reaction time is going to be equal to clicked time minus created time. So the difference between those two. Notice I've done clicked time take away created time because the click time is going to be bigger because they're always going to click after the box is created. Okay, I think what we'll also do is break that down into seconds. So we'll put brackets around there and divide it by 1,000. So our reaction time is going to be the time in seconds rather than milliseconds. And to get from milliseconds to seconds, to get from milliseconds to seconds, we divide by 1,000. So for now, let's just alert that value. See how good I am. So it will appear at some point. There we go, 3.871. So we're going to want to set the created time to the timestamp when the box is actually created, and that happens down here in this set timeout function. So created time is going to be equal to date.now, and then the clicked time is going to be equal to date.now then. Okay, great. So quick challenge for you is to alert the delay time, so the amount of time it takes for the user to click on the square after the square has appeared. How did that go? I think something like this would make sense. So create a variable, let's call it reaction time, something like that. And then we want to set reaction time to be the difference between the clicked time and the created time. So we'll say click time minus created time. And it's going to be that way round, not created time take away click time, because click time is always going to be bigger than created time, because you're going to click on it after it's created. You can't click on it before. And I'm going to put it in seconds, so we're going to divide that by 1,000 there to go from milliseconds to seconds. Okay, and then we're going to alert that value. See how that works. See how quick I am. Okay, not great. 0.0773, see if I can improve on that. Oh, that's a bit better. 0.4. 0.6, 0.3. Okay, right, not bad. So that's pretty good as it works. Now it's a little bit slow and having to click on that every time. So I think it would be a good idea to have a bit of text, say underneath this box, or maybe even above it, where we put the results, so the user's not having to click on the OK button of the alert box every time. So let's do this. At the very top, we'll have a box called Your Time, and then we'll have a span with an ID of time, and then that's where we'll put the time. So very quick challenge for you here. Instead of alerting the reaction time, can you change the value of the span, or the content of the span, to be the time? Okay, I hope you managed it. What we want to do is something like get rid of the alert, and we want document.getElement by ID time inner HTML equals reaction time. Let's just see how that works. Oh, that was quick. Okay, great. We get the idea. Okay, so now the game is working, and it's a little bit better than it was before. We're not having to wait every time when we click this alert box. What I'd like it to do is, as I said at the beginning, move the square around a little bit and change the color and occasionally make it a circle as well. So that's what we're going to do in the last video for this challenge. So our game essentially works, it just could be made a little bit more exciting. So if you're feeling creative, I would definitely recommend trying these bits out for yourself rather than following this along on the video. So try and make it so the boxes are different colors each time. Try and make it so that they appear in different positions each time. And try and make it so that occasionally the box comes up to be a circle. And that'll just shake it up a little bit, make it a little bit more exciting. You might also want to experiment with the time. So 5 seconds is possibly quite a long time. You might want to make that a bit shorter or even a bit longer. It's up to you. So I'm going to give you a few moments to go away and try out some things for yourself, and then you're welcome to watch what I do in a minute. All right, I hope that went well. Here we go. So I'm going to start by setting a random color. Now, setting a random color is actually a reasonably complicated problem. So I've gone to a website called Stack Overflow, which is a fantastic site, and as you get into your web development career, you're definitely going to come across it. It's essentially a question and answer site where anyone can answer questions from coders, and then the answers are rated. So when you do a search in Google for some issue that you've got with code, it's quite likely that you'll end up at Stack Overflow. So this guy wanted a random color generator, which is brilliant because that's exactly what I want. So I'm going to copy this function, and I'm just going to talk you through how it works. So let's copy it there first of all. We'll do some nice indents because we want to keep our code pretty. Pop that in there. Okay. So what's going on here? We're creating a string called letters. We're creating an array called letters, which is taken up from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and A, B, C, D, E, F. So they're the numbers and letters that we use in the HTML color codes. Now this split function splits the string, so this bit here is a string, it's just a set of numbers and letters, and it splits it into an array. So if you've got a set of words, for example, then you could use the split space command, and then that would split them at the space in between each word, and you would get an array filled with all of the words in that sentence. If you use the split command with nothing in between, then it just splits it in each character. So our letters array is going to be, the first one will be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, etc., then A, B, C, D, E, F. So we've got an array containing all of the different letters and numbers that we can use. Then we've got a string called color, which starts with a hash. So you'll remember that the HTML color codes all start with a hash symbol. And then we've got a for loop, which is great because it's always nice to recap things we've seen before. So it starts with I being 0 and then goes up to I being 5. Remember, this is less than 6, so I can't actually get to 6, and then goes up 1 by 1 each time. And then what we're doing is we're adding to the color string. So this plus equals means we're taking the color string as it exists and then adding to it, and we're taking an item from the letters, which is this array, the array containing the numbers and the letters there, and we're doing it using the random instruction that we've seen before. So math.random times 15, because there are 15 of these things, is that right? Possibly 16, yeah, 16 I think of these things, and this rounds it to the nearest whole number. So that will then take a random number or letter and add it to the color. So let's have a quick look at what that produces first. So alert get random color. Okay, great. So we've got a hash, and then we've got a set of numbers and letters randomly produced from that string. Brilliant. And this is going to produce a random color for us. So if we set the style of this box to have that background color before we create it, then it should be a random color each time. So let's copy that, get element by ID, box, style, background color equals, and we want to set it equal to get random color. And that makes good use of functions because we don't want to have to write that code out each time. So it just links back to this nice function up here. So let's see if that works. Hey, great. So we've got a blue one. I'll just click on that. And got a reddish one. Excellent. So we've achieved our first goal of getting a randomly colored box. So the second goal is to make it either a box or a circle, and doing that randomly. So I'll give you a quick challenge, a few seconds to go away and think about that. Pause the video and then come back. All right, did you manage it? Here's how I would do it. First of all, we'll remind ourselves how to make a circle. All it is a single style. So let's do it with JavaScript. So again, document get element by ID, box, style. And how do we do it? We use the border radius command. And my box is 200 pixels. So we want the border radius to be 100 pixels. So that should make it a circle every time. Yeah, great. But we only want to do that half the time. So, very simple. If math.random is greater than 0.5, then we'll make it into a circle. So remember, math.random produces a random number between 0 and 1. So if we split that in half, then it will either happen or not 50% of the time. So that should work, but bear in mind that we need to set the border radius back to 0 if the random number isn't greater than 0.5. Otherwise, we'll just get circles every time. So we need an else command. And then inside there, I'll copy and paste that, and we want to set the border radius to 0. Let's just try that out. So we've got a circle first time, then a square, and a square. Another square, should get a circle eventually. There we go. Okay, great. So we've got circles and squares. The last challenge then is to position it randomly. So I'll give you a moment to pause the video and try that out for yourself. All right, how'd it go? Did you get there? I think the way I would do it would be, first of all, to set the position of the circle. So we'll call it position relative. And then we can set the top and left margins so that it moves the circle around. We could do it with positions or we could do it with margins, actually. It would work well either way. Okay. Let's give this a try. So again, we want to get the element box by its ID. And this time we want to set top to, now can we do this all in one go? It's probably best to do it in a separate, with a separate variable. So we'll have a variable called top, and we'll start with a math.random, and I think this is somewhere around 400 pixels. So I'm going to have a random margin of 0 to 300 pixels and see how that works. If you've got a different screen size, then you can try a different number. So top equals top times 300. And I'll do a similar thing with the left margin. Though maybe we'll make that a little bit bigger because my screen is taller than it is wide. So So that's our top margin, that's our left margin. So we're going to want to set the top to our variable top and plus pixels. And then we'll do a similar thing for left plus pixels. Okay, let's see how that goes. Great, that's worked. So just to finish it off, we're going to make it look a little bit more attractive and maybe have a line of instruction so that someone who comes across this game would know what to do. So first of all, I'm going to choose a nice sans serif font. I'll go for Verdana. And we'll apply this font to the whole document, so the whole body of the document. So font family is going to be that. That's a bit nicer. Let's put a default value in here. Not attempted yet, so that we don't have that sort of strange gap before they've had a go. There we go. And we could even have an S there, couldn't we? But then that would look strange with the default value, so no, that's no good. Maybe we could set the default value to 0. And then we'll start off with a time of 0 seconds. At least that'll give them an idea of what they're getting into, and then a time here. I'm liking this game. Great, and then maybe a header. So we'll pop in an H1. Test your reactions. Great. And then a quick line of instruction. So click on the boxes and circles as quickly as you can. And then perhaps we'll make the time bold. So we'll give that a class of bold, and then set a style there of font weight is bold. I think that makes it stand out a little bit. Okay, so you've created your first JavaScript game. I definitely would recommend playing around with this a little bit. So maybe you can create some different shapes. You could possibly even get some images appearing there rather than just blocks of color. You can play with the time it takes to get the boxes to appear. As I said, 5,000 there is what I've gone for, but you can try anything that you like. You can add some other text here. You might want to put a border around the whole thing, or just change the style a little bit, restrict the colors to certain colors, whatever you like. Play around with it, and please do give me a link to your final game in the forums. So for the final video in this section, I'm just going to show you how to use external JavaScript. So just like with CSS, as you can imagine, with complicated sites, these scripts get extremely long. But this is a relatively simple game that we've got here in our challenge, and we've still got a page and a half or so of JavaScript, and we don't really want that messing up our HTML. So what we do, very, very similar to CSS, I'm going to copy and paste the actual script content, and then I'm going to create a new file, new text document. Let's bring this over here and paste that lot in, and then I'm going to save as, and inside the JavaScript section of the site, I'm going to, I'll just call it scripts.js, but normally you call it something a little bit more descriptive, but scripts.js will do for now. So now we've saved that. Notice we don't have the script tags or anything like that. Just with CSS we have only the JavaScript itself, so we don't need that anymore. So let's get rid of that. So all we do is add an src to our JavaScript tag, and again we'll call it scripts.js. Okay, and let's just make sure that works. There we go, the game works great. So it works great, but it's much tidier to have all of the JavaScript away in a separate file rather than putting it all in a single document. Alright, congratulations on making it to the end of the JavaScript section of the course. Please go away and try out a few sites of your own, put them in the forums, and I'd really love to see them.